Hey there, and welcome back to Rival Reviews, a podcast for anime and manga recommendations and reviews. As always, I'm your host DJ, and this week I want to take you on a journey. A land where ridiculously descriptive long titles meet just as ridiculous harems. That's right, this week we're talking about Isekai. Now, full disclosure, I know for a fact that this episode is going to have a whole probably bunch of Japanese names that I'm going to butcher, so I apologize beforehand. But yeah, essentially for those who are not aware, Isekai is one of those type of genres where, whether it's reincarnation after death, summoning into your favorite video game or book, or even being summoned all of a sudden to a fantasy land where you are immediately met with the king of some distinct country saying that you are the hero and you need to save everybody. That's generally everything that kind of encompasses under the umbrella of Isekai. I will say I definitely do enjoy the idea of reincarnation probably the most. Mainly due to the fact that, you not to get too into the idea of religion or anything like that for that matter, but I like to think that, if there is going to be something after death, being reincarnated into like some kind of fantasy land where I can, shoot a fireball and or become a knight or something like that sounds a lot better than just inevitable darkness. So I think that's why that I generally enjoy this genre, is just the idea of that. I always did find the idea of summoning a little funny, just due to the fact that it's always kind of follows the same pattern where, they get sucked up into a portal off the street or something like that, and then all of a sudden they're kind of like in this like throne room, basically said, hey, sorry for taking you out of your your everyday life, but I'm gonna throw you all this responsibility, and you're our only hope, so good luck. Basically, a great example. I think one of the best examples that I can say of this is if you've watched Shield Hero. Is like all of a sudden he just gets summoned and just gets told what to do, and then, of course, like, not too much spoilers due to the fact that I think this happens in the first episode, but like immediately gets screwed over by the princess of the country, and basically for the first good chunk of the story is him just fixing problems and also dealing with the fact that the royal family has made him hated by everybody. And I like the way that it did that in terms of like, I'm going to take you away from your everything that you love, your friends, your family, everything else like that, give you this responsibility, and then also just totally screw you right at the beginning. I always found that really funny. And then I would say, as I was speaking a lot to this last week, on Otome Isekais, I feel like a lot of them follow the immersion subplot, where whether it's a book that they wrote or a book that they read, and they have all of this insider information about what's going to happen in the story and like pivotal story points that they can take advantage of and stuff like that. I also like the angle of this one just due to the fact that, like I said, it's well, one, what I like about it too is that it's not just usually in most isekais it's like some kind of overpowered male character, where I find in most Otome isekais it's a strong female lead, and instead of having to resort to overpowered magic and sword fighting, and don't get me wrong, like obviously I love those things and everything else like that, but I like the break of them having to be a lady of the court and having to use their words instead of like a sword in a fight, and like kind of like the fighting of the backhanded compliments. I always found that really fun. Um, what I also find truly hilarious about this genre is that without fail, all of the titles are completely ridiculous. And most of the titles are like very like to the point. Like obviously, like you can get straight to the point where, like, for instance, you can go like, my reincarnated life as a slime. Like, okay, well, right out the bat, we know exactly what this is going to cover and exactly what's going on. I've brought in a couple other. I wrote down some of the most ridiculous titles that I could find. Probably more just get more ridiculous, and I swear, what I find the most is that they're getting longer. They have to be getting longer. And I know that they're doing it on purpose. They have to be. There's no way it's on accident. So some of the ridiculous titles that I was able to find was Do You Love Your Mom and her 2-hit multi-combo. I've been killing slimes for 300 years and maxed out my level. And then the one that I found that took the cake for probably one of the longest I had ever seen, the former top 1 sub-character training diary, a dedicated player is currently conquering another world. That, if that's not a mouthful, I really don't know what is. And right there in the title, you know exactly what you're strapped in for and what you're going to be reading about. Which I guess you could say is a plus or a minus. I'll leave that up for you to decide. Yeah, that being said, I know that there is a lot of hate to this genre as well. One of the ones that I know that gets a certain amount of hate is obviously Sword Art Online. Whether this is just because of, like, you know, the story is just repetitive, there's some questionable things that happen, like, you know, the whole kind of brother sister weirdness in the second season. That was kind of weird. Very happy that they strayed away from that directly after that season. And I do also understand that it gets to the point where you get so many of the same things where, you know, the main character is completely overpowered, or like they can never lose, or things like that. But I think it's also the fun of this genre is that you can just turn off your brain and just watch mindless magic fights. And especially the way animation is and everything else now, the fights are crazy good looking. And so, you know, is the story repetitive? Is it really obvious as to what's going to happen next? Is it gonna follow the same train of thought where, you know, there's a crazy harem and they're only gonna get more overpowered, and they're never gonna have any troubles doing anything and everything? And but that's, you know, that's part of the plot. So, you know, I'm a very firm believer that if you don't like it, that's okay, but you don't have to be rude to somebody who does enjoy the genre. And I would say, if anything, that's the takeaway for most things, whether it just be anime related or not. Like, there's no reason to hate on something that somebody else likes. And I am fully aware that especially in this genre, it gets a lot of unnecessary hate for whatever reason. Yeah, that being said, I did once again kind of make my top 5 as to what I kind of felt were my favorite or important isekais that I've watched. So first one I kind of put on the list, and I've kind of already talked about, is Sword Art Online. One of the really great ones, kind of hits on the immersion one where, you know, get stuck in the video game, everything else like that. It's a great watch. I don't understand why this anime gets so much hate. I find that it's another good, really introductory series as well. And yeah, I really don't understand the hate that it gets, because personally, I think the fights and the struggle, and especially the first season, like when they were truly stuck and it was like the death game and everything else like that, I would argue that it's probably one of the more favorites of any kind of anime plot that I've ever watched. And though I understand that it kind of went off the rails there a little bit kind of later on, and then now it's kind of turned more into a selective, immersive isekai type of situation, I guess. Um, I did still really enjoy the first season, and I think that the strength of the first season um, deserves the credit, and I don't think that it should get as nearly as much hate as it does. Um, so yeah. Next one, just because I kind of tied it into Sword Art Online, just because it kind of followed the same idea of the immersion into like a video game setting, was Log Horizon. Um, what I always found nice about this one is that it is kind of very similar to the sense of Sword Art Online, where they're like in the game, but there isn't really like the death game penalty, really. As we've seen, is they do revive. They get like basically like when they do die or whatever, they get sent to back to the church in their hometown or whatever, and then they get to start again. But what I also like about this one is that it's more politically based, where like, you know, a whole server of people basically woke up in a video game that they played, and then now that they're stuck here, they have to actually learn how to, like, I found that like in, for instance, like in Sword Art Online, it kind of just like all of a sudden like the entry town was there, and like stores were open, and like none of the how that happened ever really got introduced. And that's what I find really cool about Log Horizon, is that you got to see like the creation of councils and the creation of the towns and people finding what they're good at, and they like, I found that there was a lot more flushing out of the world and how it was created versus just the overarching like idea of, okay, but how do we get out of here? Obviously that is an important thing, but I enjoyed the world building in Log Horizon a lot more. Kind of tearing off from that idea. Number 3, I've put, again, I apologize, Mushoku Tensei, Jobless Reincarnation. I would argue that this is probably the first one that I ever watched with the idea of reincarnation, where the idea is that they came from the real world or Earth or whatever, and then they were reincarnated with their past memories into this fantasy world. And how they were able to kind of utilize the memories of the person that they were and who they have now become. Again, I will obviously preface that, you know, was awakened to already like the logic of, the power of knowledge, and, you know, started learning magic when they were like 3 or whatever. So they had that going for them, but I do find that it was nice that they then started adding struggle and characters that were clearly stronger than him, and that he still had a lot to learn, and he wasn't just like overwhelmingly more powerful than everybody else in the show. And what I also thought that this show did really well was it showed, so again, obviously, if you haven't seen it, I don't want to spoil too much, but I do enjoy that, because his past self was a shut-in, and like felt very low about himself and everything else like that actually translated, and he actually had to not only grow as this new person in this new world, but also grow as the person that he used to be. And I thought that that was a really cool thing that they incorporated into this story. So next one on the list is Inuyasha. Reason for this being on my list is that it's probably one of the first animes that I ever completed from start to finish. Also one of the first animes that I ever watched. And what I liked about this one was the idea of the isekai of the going back and forth. Like being able to go, so basically, you know, going from I can't remember what, but like back in the past basically, and being able to go back and forth through the well. And kind of having that freedom of going back and forth. between the two worlds, because a lot of the time we watch these isekais and the whole over thing is like, oh, I have to beat the bad guy so I can get home, or oh, I have to beat the bad guy to find the way home, or that's always like the end goal. Where this one, she wanted to go back and everything else like that because she had a whole other life and friends, and then at some point or another family on this other side of the well, as well as from her original world, and kind of being able to juggle the two and everything else like that. I thought that was a really cool way to go about the isekai genre that not, at least in my opinion, has been replicated since, unless you count what I count as number 5, and I know I'm going to get a lot of slack for this, but number 5 on my list is Digimon. Nobody would think that this is an isekai, but hear me out. They're in the real world, they're at camp, they get dragged into another world. That's isekai. And as soon as I thought about that, I knew I had to put it on this list because I love Digimon. I find that it's fun, it's great. And again, it's one of those isekais where it kind of has that return element, but then once the return, I guess, issue had been solved, it was no longer the primary focus, and it was like more about the saving this secondary world that had become a second home to the Digidestined and everything else like that. And then, kind of the flip-flop of almost kind of like a reverse isekai, where like they were then dealing with evil Digimon in the real world, which I thought was, again, really cool and a really different take on the way things are done generally in this genre. So that's why that was in number 5. So I guess next step is to then now go over the questions from last week. So we had a couple here. Let's see. Who is your favorite ship that should have happened but didn't? Okay, so this is again, I keep bringing this up, but it is also one of my favorite animes. But Mustang and Hawkeye 100%. They teased it, and obviously they care for each other very much, and I understand that they're going for the whole, they're strong comrades, and they're the ones that they trust the most out of each other and everything else like that. But I wanted them together so bad, and I still to this day truly hope that it happens. That would be followed very closely by Miku over Yotsuba in the quintessential quintuplets. I don't care what everybody says. I liked the chemistry between the male lead and Miku so much better than with Yotsuba, and I still, to this day, do not understand why it went that way. If you read it, I'd love to hear your opinion on that argument, because am I crazy? I don't think I'm crazy. Maybe I'm crazy. And then I'm going to follow that up with basically any harem romance that chooses some ridiculous choice that was either introduced at the beginning of the thing, where it was clearly that she was going to be the female lead, but there's a childhood best friend that they've had the entire time there, and they were never together with. Very good example of this, Nisekoi. I'm just gonna leave it at that. I've never understood it. And then I guess, currently what I'm reading. So currently what I'm reading is a manga called Rusu. Again, apologize. Rusu no Himo Seikatsu. I don't really know what the English of that is, but essentially this is again one of those, I guess, summoning isekais, where basically he's summoned to. This one I find interesting though, because instead of like being OP or having to be the hero to defeat the bad guy, he's actually summoned to be the new king of a country, which I find kind of super interesting, where there's no real fighting. It's like more all about like kind of the politics There is obviously like some magical elements involved and everything else like that, but none of that really comes from the male lead, which is interesting. So I would give that a read if you maybe have some time. So that's all I have for this week. Next week I'm thinking about going into the dub versus sub element and kind of what I feel are some strong dubs in comparison to subs, and kind of the argument as to not so much which one is better, but why some prefer ones over the other. So as always, thank you for listening. Once again, thank you for any reviews that I got this week and everything else like that. And for the people that gave me the questions, that's awesome. And like I said, at the end of the day, that's what I kind of want this more to be about, is a conversation between us. So once again, it's Rival X Reviews on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and then rivalxreviews@gmail.com if you just want to email me any questions or comments or anything else like that. And yeah, I will see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.